Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee of the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. Apologies for absent. Item 1. Apologies have been received from Councillor Argencio and Councillor Douglas Johnson is attending as her substitute. We also had apologies from Councillor Moynihan and Councillor Kidd. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Councillor Carl Hughes, our new committee member from Doncaster Council. Welcome. Thank you. Right, swiftly on to agenda item 2, urgent item announcements. I have none. Item 3, items to be considered in the absence of press and public. There are none. Declaration of interest by any members. Do members have any declarations of interest? I see none. Fine. Reports and questions by members. I have received none. And we move on to item 6. I have questions from members of the public. They are not in attendance, I understand. We've received 3 questions from Matthew Smith. As he is unable to attend, these will be read out on his behalf.
Thank you, Chair. It has been reported that 82% of bus drivers were subject to abuse in the year up to April 2024 nationally. Witnessing violent incidents and antisocial behaviour on the bus negatively affects passengers as well as drivers and dissuades public transport use. Yeah. No. Just lost my place. Yet bus drivers are yet to receive body cams like super trammed staff. With this in mind, could you please mandate body cams for all bus drivers in South Yorkshire?
I will respond to this. Whilst body-worn cameras are used by support staff in the industry, such as revenue protection officers on buses and trams and interchange staff, as feedback we've received from those bus companies we have spoken to is that there is not significant support for drivers to use them. Most drivers' cabs are fitted with CCTV, which has proven successful on many occasions on securing evidence against a passenger who has verbally or physically threatened a driver. And the feedback the transport officers have received is this is the preferred method to tackle the issue. And from the Mayor it says, I will continue to discuss with bus operators the need for messaging both inside and outside bus that highlights the use of CCTV to provide the initial deterrent. We are determined that staff and passenger safety will be of the highest priority during the move to a franchise service, with that reflected in what we expect of our bus operators in terms of deterrence, protecting individual safety and supporting bus drivers. Thank you. Next question.
What steps are you taking to encourage councils in South Yorkshire to improve poor literacy figures highlighted by research commissioned by SIMCA in this area?
This is the response. The MCA works in partnership with the constituent councils where we have shared priorities. We collaborate to identify shared priorities and deliver change together. Improving literacy outcomes is one such priority. The Mayor has allocated funding to develop a regional early years literacy programme which is being co-designed, with the 4 South Yorkshire councils and a range of partners. This collaborative approach ensures the programme reflects local strengths and needs. We already have some fantastic success in literacy across South Yorkshire, with remarkable innovation being led locally through this programme. I aim to bring that together, scale good practice and invest more in what works. Next question.
Meadowhall Interchange is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week coach interchange with National Express, Megabus and Flixbus departures daily between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m. My own experience of waiting for a Megabus years ago was frankly horrific, entailing arriving on public transport around 11:30 p.m. to wait for a coach at 2:40 in the morning. The waiting room was and is locked between the hours of 12 midnight and 5 a.m. with no access to toilets. My understanding was and is that this was for the convenience of the cleaning staff and that there was and is the same amount of staff on site when the waiting room is closed as when it is open. Can you please act to ensure that toilet facilities are available for coach passengers at all times of day and commit to liaising with disabled groups to work together to improve toilet access for disabled passengers during this time?
Thank you for raising that concern and your feedback regarding the lack of indoor waiting times at toilet facilities at Mayoral interchange during overnight hours. Sometimes I think from my son's experience that you have to arrive that early for the mega bus to because it leaves early quite often, leaving people stranded. Anyway, we recognise that the non-provision of these amenities between midnight and 5 a.m. can have an impact on customers in not an ideal situation. They will look into this matter and explore potential solutions in consultation with relevant stakeholders, and I hope that we do. Your feedback is appreciated and will help inform our discussions moving forward. Okie dokie. Thank you very much for that. Moving on to agenda item 7, minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of September and review of the action log. Right. Move forward. I'll go through the minutes from the last meeting. If we go through this agenda, page 6, agenda page 7, agenda page 8, agenda page 9, agenda page 10, agenda page 11, and page 12 was just for me to sign, so that's done. Everybody content with that? Okay. And then we'll move on to the review of the latest forward plan of key decisions. Okay. Forward plan is the key decisions at the time of publishing papers is attached in the pack. And we'll go through any questions that anybody has on the forward plan. If I any questions I can see if I go through page. It's not numbered, that isn't it? So. Page 16. I have some questions on it. There's on the revenue allocated for the project feasibility fund. So to be allocated as follows: 4 million revenue, development transformational, and then 4 million for the MCA. I presume that's 8 million for the MCA and then 16 million for all the other authorities in total. Is that correct? Because there's 4 million and 4 million, but it does come to a total of about 24 million. I just wondered whether this is being siphoned off into two lots. I don't know.
I'll seek a clarification, Chair.
Yeah, just because it says 4 million for the MCA and then there's this 4 million revenue, which doesn't necessarily make sense on that. If we move on to page 17, any questions? Page 18, any questions? Page 19. I've got a question on this as well. There's the Mayor Delivery Fund Awards. Is this all dressed up as 7.2 million on promotion for the Mayor? Is that publicity and promotion, or is that actually going to something else in detail? On the Mayor Delivery Fund Awards on page 19. Because it says investments at Tell Our Story and Marketing in South Yorkshire up to 3.98 million and building their core capabilities up to a value of 3.18 million. Is that all on? Is that a promotional budget that we're talking about?
So it's a budget for delivering the Mayor's ambitions. We'll seek clarification from the teams who deliver those budgets, but the MCA board a few months ago approved this part. I can see we've got Gareth on screen now as well. And then this is a notice for individual schemes that are awarded from within that part to deliver schemes that are within the Mayor's manifesto.
Hannah?
So it is on delivering schemes rather than comms around delivering schemes. I don't know. That's
We'll
what I'm
clarify
saying.
that with the teams, but that's my understanding. It's schemes within these headers that are named on the forward plan.
Just the way I read it, it reads as comms, 7.2 million. Page 20. Something that's close to my heart, is on the transforming city funds, the Nether Edge wedge, about money to be granted. I know that there's some massive overspend on parts of that budget. Having seen it at the having seen it at Sheffield City Council, I just wondered when we're likely to see a budget for that and a planned decision date.
We can ask from the relevant teams, but at the moment, as far as we know, we don't have a confirmed date for that one yet.
Claire, excuse my ignorance, but what is the Nether Edge wedge other than an entertaining rhyme?
It's a scheme to transform from Nether Edge towards the city centre. Some of the experience of people transporting within the centre. Can you say any better, Douglas?
Yeah, I mean, only say it. So it's a walking and cycling scheme over long distance from Nether Edge, active travel from Nether Edge from the suburbs into the city centre, and then to link up through the city centre and then out. So it's about building up the network of routes that actually make it possible to get about, rather than high quality sections that don't go anywhere. There's a load of road safety measures, pedestrian improvements, removing an underpass, I think, and having a controlled crossing over some major roads, that sort of thing. We're on page 21. So I ask about, it says purchase of rail for use during rail replacement programme. The big problem last week with the Supertram was the wires. We know if they're actually purchasing wires to make the trams run efficiently rather than be cancelled as well.
We can certainly put it to the relevant team. The list in the forward plan is collated from across the organisation, so we'll dish out all of these and come back to you with responses.
Any further questions?
Just going to ask on that, if we're actually talking about purchasing rails, just want to see, where are we purchasing the rails from? Given that we've actually had a history of making rails, so it's a specialist steel manufacturing process, are we actually buying them from South Yorkshire or from elsewhere in the world? I would genuinely be interested to know where.
So anything published on the forward plan, we've got obligations about transparency, about how the money's being spent and the decisions that are being made. At the moment, this is just on the forward plan, decisions not been taken, but as and when we publish the relevant information for this decision, we can circulate it with the committee. It'll be public information about where contracts are awarded, etc.
Thank you for that, Douglas. Informative. Move on to page 22. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll move on to item 9, which is the integrated assessment readiness. And is that Andy we've got there? We've got Andy Leverton in the meeting, and we've got Gareth looking faintly ill, but I think you're quite more ill than that, coming down the line. I hand over to you two.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I can't be with you today. I'm on my 5th round of COVID, so probably better that you don't catch what I've got. It's pretty grim. But hopefully the committee will be aware we provided a briefing a week or two ago now. You've probably all seen the pack, so we'll take it as read. But Andy and myself are happy to just update on where we are with the integrated settlement, the latest information that's starting to flow, given budget is tomorrow, and then take any questions. So I'll stop there and pass over to Andy in the room. Thank you.
Okay, thanks all for your time. Good to meet you. I'm Andy Leverton. I'm the Principal for Corporate Planning and Performance at CIMCA, and I lead on the Integrated Settlement Outcomes Framework. So I'll take the slides as read, but the highlights are in the pack. What the integrated settlement is, why it's important, what we've been doing as an organisation to prepare for it, what we're doing to develop the integrated settlement outcomes framework, which will help us monitor delivery. And then we've set out some potential implications for yourselves as a committee, considerations for the outcomes framework. Happy to take questions.
I'll allow others to go first, but are the deadlines being met on when we're receiving the integrated settlement figures? Because I think there are some figures that we've been given and some deadlines and dates that some of them which are passed, I believe. How fast are we moving down the process, and is it still a truly, because there was some indication that some of the integrated assessment there was a sort of a little bit of a drift towards siphoning off money for specific areas to be spent on. How is that working out? Are we still the full integrated settlement, or are there a little few splinters to the side that are going ahead now?
I'll let Gareth talk about that second question, but in terms of the first part, we have received information from government later than we originally anticipated. We're still awaiting confirmation of the quantum for some of the pillars in the framework. We're expecting that in the next couple of days, as Gareth says, in line with budget announcements.
So, Chair, on the second part of your question, I think it's fair to say when this process started, it was really designed to support local autonomy in terms of the outcomes that we set. And the principle was that we would be better placed to set those outcomes, both to support what we're trying to achieve locally and to support the national growth missions. I think what we're beginning to see is a move away from that and a move to a more standardisation in terms of the way in which government will agree outcomes with us and monitor us against the delivery of those. So that is a move away from wholly local autonomy to something that's a bit more homogenous. So that is a divergence. But overall, this is still a much improved position on what we've got currently.
Thank you for that, Gareth. Brian coming in.
So how do we anticipate performance reports to the committee to scrutiny then on the integrated settlement?
So there will be 6 monthly programme boards with government. So they're scheduled to start in September next year. We anticipate there being a shadow programme board in March or April, and that'll be the opportunity for us to work through how that process will work. And we would anticipate bringing regular reports to yourselves in line with that schedule.
Thank you for that. The next, what will, right, okay, you've said you're going to do a 6-month review and then regular. So at the end of year one, how are we looking at how scrutiny will be looking at the settlement, and how will that work? Talk me through it a little bit.
Yes, as part of the reporting to government, we'll report on how we're spending against each of the pillars of integrated settlement, as well as reporting on performance against a series of outcome indicators that we're agreeing with government, and both of those will be brought together in those reports to government. The anticipation is that we will have a target for each indicator, which is through to the end of 28-29 financial year, and then there will be milestones at the end of each financial year. So the position we will report is against where we anticipate being at the end of each financial year.
Hannah?
Thank you. Yeah, I just trying to get my head around the timescale here. So are we going to see this, because obviously this is a significant change, are we going to see it as so is there going to be a date where it changes, or are we going to see sort of a more of a slow kind of like drip through? Because obviously we've got projects that are, that are in existence, that have been funded, are being managed in the sort of the old system, if you like, which we've obviously got our eye on as a scrutiny committee. Is there going to be sort of like a hard cut-off where the whole kind of working changes, and are those projects going to be integrated into the different pillars and sort of where they fit, or are you going to sort of have the two different systems running a little bit sort of concurrently? Because it's a really big change, but it seems quite a gradual sort of timescale of implementation, and obviously, as you say, the government are already kind of slowing that down a touch.
Yeah, as you say, some of the funding will be continuation of existing funding, so year one potentially of the integrated settlement will be relatively similar, and then as we progress through the years, that will be the opportunity where there's more flexibility to decide how to do things differently, but there will be existing programmes that are rolled up into that first year.
So that gives us then, Claire, the opportunity to kind of, I guess, adapt the way that we're, doing that scrutiny as things start to roll in.
My concern is whether we meet enough to be able to put the challenge in at the appropriate times, because at the moment we're only scheduled to meet 5 times a year. With the single assessment, then obviously things are going to be moving a bit faster, because we have to remember we don't meet at all between the end of March and the middle of July, and so lots of things can happen without any scrutiny whatsoever in those 3 months, basically. And so it can be going down the line with lots of decisions that are going through that there is no ability to input scrutiny during those months, and then whether we're meeting at the appropriate times to be able to challenge the mayor on scrutiny, because we do as a committee have the ability for 5 of us to call in decisions, and that may be something that would have to be deployed more frequently if the appropriate measures are not put in place. Hannah.
So, I mean, there must surely be a plan somewhere within the organisation for what's going to come down the line.
I think on page 31, it's got a little statement there saying your ability to comply fully with timescales is dependent on complete information about the quantum of funding and having sufficient information to allow you to be confident to deliver. Have you any idea when that will first start? Because that's the starting point for everything. When do you think that quantum of funding knowledge will be there?
We're hoping it'll be this week in line with budget announcement. There's just a couple of funding streams that we haven't heard yet. And once we've clarified that allows us then to agree the final set of indicators and start working through the targets for the framework and have that all in place. I think final agreement with government at ministerial level will be January or early February, and then we'll have that all ready for the new financial year.
And as Hannah said, would you be able to make that aware to the committee when actually that's been done? Because obviously that's when the work starts, isn't it?
Yeah. I think the plan is to come back to the next committee to update.
Josh.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier, your concern that this committee won't be able to scrutinise a lot of the work. So I just wonder what is the solution to that? Obviously, we've mentioned call-in procedure. I just wonder, is it within the power of this committee to either recommend or just, put in more meetings for the year?
It is, Sarah.
Yeah, so that's something that the committee might want to consider as part of its work planning moving forward.
It's my personal view, Chair, that I think we should be meeting more, and as you say, there's that huge gap where we don't meet. I think it's really important that we do in that time. So I'm in favour personally of this committee meeting more often. And then on that, I mean, I don't know if we're going to make recommendations now or what, but on that I would just sort of tag in that as a result of that we just need to be making sure that the scrutiny protocol is properly implemented.
I agree. I can't disagree with that. Brian.
No problems with committee meeting more often. I'm not always in favour of calling because I think calling slows down decisions. But what I am in favour is making sure that when we do set his work programme for all the meetings going forward, that we agenda them right and we do have the settlement on, so we know at what point we are actually looking at that. Because you can call in all the time, and all that's doing is slowing positions down. What you should have a strategic plan saying, right, you've got your forward plan there, these are the decisions what they're looking at making over the next few years. Use that, make sure you've got that right, and said to officers, we want a summary of budget, because budget will change from time, because whatever we get this year, if economy slows down or something and the government has to change its strategy, it'll change. So we need to make sure we've got a rolling programme where we can monitor it over the period and make sure it's monitored right with right figures in.
I think we've also got to add in pre-decision scrutiny so that it's in the appropriate time, so that there can be changes and tweaks if necessary. So that pre-decision scrutiny is important to this process.
One of the things I would like to ask is how, Gareth or whatever, how much, because I mean you do talk about it in here, about how, because it's a single assessment and it's not funding streams which we're then scrutinising, is how that will then change how we operate, because we're doing it, we're not looking at a funding stream that the whatever government has given us, and then we're looking at how that's likely to be spent and what the plans are for that, and then making any suggestions for that. With a single assessment, obviously there's that flexibility in the budget, which quite rightly, which moves on, but also how we are able to monitor all these different things.
So, Chair, I think that's the really important question in all this. So, for me, I think there are 3 areas of strategic interest to this committee that you might wish to think about when you're thinking about your work plan for the new year. The first is the outcomes framework and a new relationship with government where we are contracting essentially for the delivery of an agreed set of outcomes. So that's a fundamentally different relationship with government. The second is our performance against all these outcomes and targets that we set. So you might wish to just check how we're doing. But I think the third point is what you've just mentioned, Chair. This is a fundamentally different way of working that will require the organisation to reconfigure in a really quite significant way. We have, for the last 10 years, been managing an annual budget that had 60 plus funding streams that required us just to work in individual silos. And if we're to maximise the flexibilities and the freedoms that this integrated settlement will bring us, we need to work differently. So we need to stop looking at the world in the context of whether this is a Transforming Cities programme or a City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement programme or an active travel programme, and think more fundamentally about this is a place-shaping programme with lots of resources and inputs going into it in return for a whole bunch of outcomes at the back end. So you might want to test with us how we are managing that transition from an organisation that was fit for purpose for a world that is going to be fundamentally different from 1st of April next year. I think my final point is, and just to give the committee some assurance, we will still set the budget in a normal way. We will still have to comply with all our governance procedures about the approval of individual projects and procedures. We'll still have all our forward publication of decisions that are coming forward. So whilst we will be able to transact with a bit more freedom, what we're not going to do is compromise on all the sort of good governance bits that you'll be familiar with from your own host authorities or within the MCA. I think there is a big bit of learning for us all on this. So this is stepping into a slightly new world. So I do think, along with just giving you an update on how we're cracking on in the context of the reporting to the performance board that Andy mentioned, it would just be good to touch base with you about how this is shaping up for us, how we're getting on, the lessons that we're learning, and the implications for the committee. So I think we can commit just to keep talking to you about this and iterating through it as we get to know more information. Sorry, I'm a bit wheezy.
No, that's fine, Gareth. We understand. Hannah?
So it feels to me like there must be a plan of work somewhere in the organisation. So this forward plan here, this is around the existing framework, the old framework. So this is very specific projects on very specific funding streams. And this project here about negotiating the integrated settlement, sorting out the outcomes framework and so on, that is not a project in its own right. That is a means to an end. So the purpose of this is so that the organisation and the mayor can have more flexibility and freedom in implementing what. That's what I want to know. What is next? So once this thing is in place, these things will all be done. This will be negotiated. So what, you know, what's next? What are the projects that this is going to enable and facilitate? And I feel like without knowing that, we have absolutely no idea, you know, what we're trying to scrutinise essentially. And these gentlemen probably don't know the answer to that.
Do you want to answer that?
Not yet.
Best possible.
I'll let Gareth come in on that one.
Yeah, I'll have a crack.
Gareth, it's for you.
So I think two elements to it. We mentioned earlier in this conversation that there will be a continuation of some of the programs of activity because they're already underway, and we'll finish those off. So what we might stop doing is calling everything a city region sustainable transport program, because that, in a sense, it's gone, but the project itself will live on into the new world. The harder bit, because we've just not seen the numbers, is we don't know what's next. So once we've got the budget allocations, which hopefully arrive after tomorrow when the Chancellor stands up and starts telling the world what we'll receive, that's when we'll start to know it. Well, clearly, if we've got new funding, it will take us time then to come up with the individual projects. But the golden thread through all this is we've got our Emerging South Yorkshire strategy, which is the sort of broad plan about what we're all about and what we're going to deliver. We've then got the outcomes frameworks and the target that we agree with government, and that's what we're aiming for on a sort of very tangible, measurable basis. And then the bit in the middle will be the projects. So how do we get from a sort of strategy document over there to targets over there? But it'll be a whole list of projects. Some of those are already in existence and they're in various stages of development and delivery. Some of them will be new, and we'll have to work out what those are once we know what money we've got and what targets we're aiming for. So I think that hopefully not too wishy an answer, but it is quite difficult for us until we know what we're working with.
Difficult. Mick?
That seamlessly brings me on to the suggestion that we do need, through all this process, training and briefing. We need to know what parameters you're working in, and then we can understand the parameters that we can look at. And so I think that's important. When we get to a place where we've got more detail in terms of budgets, more in what outcomes that are expected, how we're going to measure those outcomes, that's when we need a briefing. And briefings are easier because we can do them online and we don't have to physically come here. So we've got an opportunity then. Once we've got the plan, we've got to understand what responsibilities we've got to scrutinise that plan, whether it be pre-decision making scrutiny or ensuring that it's about performance scrutiny or whatever opportunity, because I know in any process with government things change as things move on, and we need to be getting those briefings in the appropriate time. So that's got part of our work programme is us to have the ability to get the knowledge to be able to scrutinise what we need to scrutinise. I think that
we need one on this ASAP as soon as we get that funding decision.
Yes.
After the budget.
Yeah, and I think that's where we need our programme to be able to deliver what we're expected to do.
I see Sarah writing this down, which is good because it is something we do need. Douglas.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to ask, first of all, where we can see the outcomes framework. And apologies because I'm a sub on the committee now. Has that been, have we had sight of that? Yeah, where is it, first of all, for us to see?
It will ultimately be published. We're working towards a third draft at the moment. The next deadline for that is the 10th of December. And then once it's all finalised and agreed with government fully, then it will ultimately be published. But if you do want to get a sense of what it will look like, Greater Manchester and West Midlands frameworks are currently available on the internet.
All right, yeah, you've jumped ahead because you've already answered the question that I haven't asked yet. So I take it that, yeah, we've not seen, we've not discussed, we've not been consulted on what goes in the outcomes framework. You said it will be published. Implicit in that is perhaps the sense that we're not being invited to see the draft framework. And given that someone's made a decision to submit at least 2 drafts to government already, and it's quite an advanced piece of work. I'm just wondering where the scrutiny comes into this. So what's been the decision-making process to decide what is in the outcomes framework? Is the next thing.
Yeah, so since the summer we've had a series of workshops with local authority colleagues, so they're the policy and strategy leads across each of the 4 authorities, and we've been having the conversation about the outcomes framework as it develops. They are then having that conversation internally, and we've presented to PSP on several occasions to discuss how the outcomes framework is shaping up. So PSP, the chiefs and leaders of the council are all well cited on what's in the current draft. As I say, the 3rd draft is due on the 10th of December, and we'll be talking to PSP on the 9th about where we've got to with the latest iteration. But there's so many moving parts, so many bits of information that we're gradually getting from government that is a constantly changing picture.
So could you circulate the current draft?
I think that should be okay.
Did we get a draft of that? I think Gareth talked us through this paper.
Yeah, we didn't include the detail
frameworks.
in there.
Okay, so I mean, yeah, I think we probably all ought to have eyes on what's in there, even though I appreciate effective the decision's already been made. So next question in that series is, what does the outcome framework reflect? Is this a reflection on Oliver Coppard's personal manifesto for being mayor? Is it something that is meant to differentiate what Simca does as opposed to local authorities, or is it intended to be outcomes for the whole governance of the whole of South Yorkshire? What's the approach to it?
So the bounds of integrated settlement are limited by what the government have agreed will go into the funding, so it's relatively narrow in terms of what we care about in South Yorkshire. Not everything is represented within integrated settlement, so what we care about in the county might be represented in the wider outcomes framework, which is in our current corporate plan and in our assurance framework, and that does touch on all of the things that we care about in South Yorkshire. Integrated settlement is an ongoing conversation about what's included and what's not included, and that may change over the coming years. There are some indications of other things that will eventually be rolled up into integrated settlement as part of the ongoing conversation around devolution, and some of that originates in the white paper on English devolution.
Okay, good. I think you're getting good at answering the question before I ask it, because the final question was about where we're going with devolution. So what I really want to ask is, with the proposal to give combined authorities the general power of competence, so essentially it will have jurisdiction over all areas that are currently undertaken by local authorities, does this outcomes framework anticipate having those powers and working towards those outcomes? And then if so, what role does that leave for district councils in the authority?
Yeah, I'm not well placed to answer that wider question, but in terms of next steps, in terms of that ongoing devolution, we will now have a right to request. So there are areas that aren't currently in integrated settlement, and we have the right now to put forward other areas that we think they should be within the integrated settlement, which comes back to that point of not just spending money in separate strands, but actually bringing all together different bits of activity so that we maximise our delivery in that space.
Hand over to Rebecca first.
Yeah, so just a couple of points. Councillor said in terms of the outcomes framework, it is proposed that goes to the MCA board in January for consideration, and the plan is to share in advance with the committee where that's got to in terms of those negotiations with government. So just to provide that assurance. In terms of devolution, we're currently working through what's in the bill. So the proposal would be in accordance with the work plan that's agreed with the committee to bring some briefing sessions forward on that, including what it means for us on the general power of competence.
Can I just clarify on the request? So, suppose what's really wanting to is if we have circulated the current draft, so it'll be the second draft of the outcomes framework, as in it's a concrete document. Can that be circulated still? That should come to members here, presumably. We don't have to wait till January for another version of it.
Yeah, we can share that under the usual provisions of confidentiality with committee members.
Thank you. Brian?
I believe the integrated settlement officers will know what kind of settlement they are, because Treasury actually talk to people and tell them what kind of monies they're getting. They do it at local governmental level, they do it at all levels. Clearly, the settlement's built about the government's plan for housing, growth in the area. They've got a strategy to build so many houses. They're telling local authorities they've got to change the development plans on how many houses they build, but surely the framework has got to be linked to that, and growth in jobs, because that's what it's all about, making sure they get more money in the economy that way.
Yeah, you'll see when we share the draft framework, there's focus on housing and job creation in there.
Hannah, do you have a question?
Yeah, but to be honest, Rebecca sort of touched on the point, which is obviously, Douglas has asked for a document to be shared, which is, not currently in the public domain. And I think just reiterating, like we did around the airport conversations, that if as a scrutiny committee we're only seeing stuff when it comes into the public domain, there's no pre-decision sort of scrutiny or assurances going on there as well. So I think just to, reiterate from a committee point of view, if documents and items are shared with us, I think we all have a responsibility to uphold that confidentiality if it is made clear to us that this is not in the public domain and it is not for sharing further, and some clear parameters about whether that is going to members, whether that's going to subs as well, potentially. I think we would all rather see that stuff earlier, even if that has caveats around it, around sharing, rather than waiting till after the fact.
No, that sounds appropriate. The other thing I'd like to ask is, because obviously we're getting all sorts of, I've been told that the police and crime panel is going to be abolished, the fire authority is going to come into open scrutiny functions. How will that work with those funding streams as well? And how much integration will there be with any of that? Does Gareth, do you have the answer to that one?
The integrated settlement doesn't include police or fire funding, so it's not every funding stream we get. So things like the gain share funding that you'll probably be familiar with won't flow into the integrated settlement, but it does represent a significant consolidation of quite a lot of the individual funding streams that we do get. Police funding, though, is restricted. We have to manage it distinctly under what we call the police fund, and I assume it will be the same with fire funding, should that come to us into the future as well.
Because the two are going to be linked anyway, because if those bodies are going to be scrapped, even though they're not funding, there needs to be a revisit to the Constitution on how many scrutiny bodies we have and how they're going to interact with each other. Is that correct?
Yes, so as it's presented currently in the bill, the proposal is that fire scrutiny will sit with the MCA, and we need to work through proposals that government have around police and crime functions moving forward. So I would anticipate a significant part of that integration programme to be relooking at the governance arrangements, including the overview and scrutiny function.
Thank you. That sounds appropriate.
Thank you.
Carl.
Thank you. I think it's, Gareth, is it right that the main aim of the integrated settlement is streamlining of funding, and it mentions in the report that it's going to allow the MCA increased discretion with that funding. Can you just expand on that for me, please? I don't quite understand what that means.
Certainly, Councillor. So I can describe the MCA's budget to you as almost like 60 mini budgets, and it's probably more than that at the moment. And that's because right now we receive pockets of money, envelopes of money from government, and each of those comes with their own rules, their own funding agreement, their own conditions about what we can spend it on, what we can't spend it on. They come with their own reporting requirements. So we've got teams of people in this authority who are very busy simply feeding an administrative machine in sending reporting back to central government. And what that means is that we work in silos a lot of the time because you can't draw the dots, join the dots between two individual funding streams in the way that we'd like. So if I just give you an example in Doncaster, Councillor, we're clearly investing quite a bit of money into the airport. What we'd really like to do is support interventions around junction 3 of the M18. We'd like to get people to the job opportunities through better bus connections and so on. And right now that's really difficult because you have to bid into government for money. You're then constrained about what you do with that money. Some of that money might have to be used by the end of that financial year. Some of it might be multiple years into the future. And what it stops us doing is just addressing the fundamental problem, which is we've got a good growth opportunity. To make that growth opportunity fly, we've got to increase connectivity and increase the ability to people to access opportunity in a really quick and efficient way. So if we get more flexibility over the whole quantum, that means that we can just make decisions that say, this project over here will require bits of transport, bits of skills and employment, bits of business growth activity. And then rather than someone like me, sat there for weeks and then trying to work out how we stitch all this together, the funding is just there in a more like singular block. And then we can just say, okay, it's that pocket, it's that quantum of money that is required to do that. And then we invest in the total project rather than bits of it. So we've got loads of good examples about where we've really generated good success just down the road from here at the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation District. Loads of good companies, but we really struggle to get people there. So you've got apprentices in Barnsley and Doncaster and Rotherham and Sheffield getting up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to get there because they can't get a bus there. There's no tram. So unless your mum or dad is willing to drop you off, you're not going to see the benefits of those opportunities. We've been describing this problem to government for a long time. And it's just a symptom of the fact that government works in its own department. So Department for Transport gives us money, Department for Education gives us money, Department for Business Innovation gives us money, and they all work in a slightly different way. So by the time the money gets to us, it's just carved up into 1,000 small pieces. And it means we miss the ability to answer the whole question at once. So that flexibility should help us start to address that. Now, in that lies the big challenge about how we turn this organisation into an organisation that can deliver against it. So there's a big work on, but that's the real prize in all this.
Thank you. And I know one word can cover one word can create a lot of work. And obviously in that same report, to ensure you can use those efficiencies and the improvements that the integrated settlement may provide, you mentioned that MCA have got to pivot to actually deliver that. What do you mean by pivot?
So we built an organisation to support the funding realities that we've had for the period 2014 through to today. And that's that we are largely delivery agents for government agendas. So we don't have an awful lot of discretion. So we focus a lot of our time in managing the relationship with government that exists today. So when I say pivot, I'm basically saying the organisation is pointing over there right now. That's the right way to point because that's the game today. In the future, when all this administration drops away, all the reporting requirements, we get our funding in a much more sort of coherent manner. The opportunity means that we're going to have to start thinking over there instead. So rather than having teams of people filling in monitoring returns to government, our policy people just thinking, okay, how do I support this government agenda? We'll have to stand back and say, what's right for South Yorkshire? How do we deliver all the right data, insights to make sure that the decisions that we're now making in South Yorkshire, rather than being made for us down in Whitehall, are really good quality? we'll need to make sure that our management and reporting systems are supportive of more dynamic decision making. So right now, if we're underspending on a transport program, I'll go to the board and say, oh dear, we're underspending on this transport program. We'll talk to government and hope they don't take the money off us. Into the future, I'll be able to go to the board and say, we're underspending on that transport program, but we've got a real opportunity over here on this growth project. So we should think about moving the money over there. And that requires a different level of management information than we're used to providing. And some of those teams exist, but they're not at the right capacity. We don't have the right systems and capabilities. So we're going to have to reshape the way that we do business and think about the skills that we have, because the world's changing for us. And if we keep pointing over there, we'll be forever playing the old game rather than the new one.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Gareth, for answering those with a raging fever, I can see. Thank you very much.
Sorry, yeah, I'm trying my best.
Thank you very much, Gareth. Thank you, Andy. Thanks for your time. I see no more questions, and we'll thank you. And we'll do a quick changeover, I think, to agenda item 10.
Hello, everyone.
Right. The statement of intent sets out Simca's ambition to use devolution to bring decision-making closer to communities and foster stronger relationship with the public. Marks a cultural shift towards meaningful participation and co-creation, that's a word, moving beyond traditional consultation. These commitments reflect the Mayor's pledge to do politics differently and aim to restore trust in public institutions. Hand over to Leon Ronan-Clond, welcome, and let you present the report.
Hiya. Chair, I don't know how much you want me to say, because I was advised that it was probably leave the opportunity for time to answer questions on what may have been read in the report. I'm happy to do a little presentation on what was read in the report, or I can jump straight to questions. It's up to you, Chair.
I can kick off 10. In here, at the bottom of the executive summary, you talk about devolved power. That includes, from the government, scrap police and crime panels, get rid of the fire authorities, nationalise pensions, taking planning and taxes away from local councils. How's that devolving power?
Did I say that? Sorry, in the report?
No, I'm just asking this at the bottom.
Oh, right, okay. It made my heart jump then.
All the things that seem to be happening, but it says to the broad reference to devolved power.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, yeah, thank you. So I suppose where we're coming out from the devolution angle was that this, with the integrated settlement and with the devolution bill, this is a sort of big opportunity to move away from devolution of, from one rung of power, government, to another rung of power, mayoral combined authority, and try and realise the full potential of devolution to bring decisions as close to communities as possible and increase public participation in decision making. So that's through using more creative and sort of more proactive forms of engagement with the community and consultation with the community. So that's one of the things that the engagement strategy is trying to promote, and one of the reasons why the engagement, we're looking to co-design the engagement strategy with partners as well, to sort of begin on the right foot towards that agenda.
Because all I see with part of the, when you say devolved power, talk me through some of the things that the government are bringing down from Whitehall, because traditionally over many years they've always, I mean, this is, through my lifetime we've talked about devolving power, and yet I only ever see councils losing power to a sort of further up. What sort of things are coming down from Whitehall down to South Yorkshire?
I suppose it's less looking at specific powers that are coming down and more trying to sort of take the opportunity from a timing perspective to sort of reframe what engagement looks like, and traditionally how we've engaged at Simca and how we might want to engage going forward, and sort of recognising the Mayor's passion and enthusiasm for engaging more with communities across South Yorkshire. So what does that look like, and how does that include partners? I think there's times when we can engage directly with communities, for instance around transport, where we have the powers around that, and there's other times where local authorities are better placed to consult and engage with communities, and how can we work with local authorities to engage with those communities more appropriately. And also, I think in terms of reaching out to sort of seldom heard groups, there's an opportunity, further opportunity to work with the voluntary sector as well, who are sort of obviously working a lot with different groups across South Yorkshire, and how can we maximise those relationships as well. So rather than duplicating efforts and reinventing the wheel, how can we complement existing engagement efforts and really sort of pack a punch and try and maximise existing engagement efforts that are already being led by local authorities and the voluntary sector.
Hannah.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you. I've been just struggling a little bit with my cross-referencing on this document. So obviously you've had those conversations with stakeholders, had loads of feedback, which is really clearly laid out. And I found the recommendations, A2, I don't know, Z, whatever it was. Yeah, there's a lot. And then there's some that's labelled as draft, so we've got some draft principles as well. I might be being stupid, I can't find that list of draft principles anywhere else in the document. This might genuinely just be me being stupid, so.
Yeah, the draft principles are definitely in this statement of intent for engagement. I can find you the pages that they're on, but
yes,
now
please.
is probably not the best. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I was just picking up on what was said about sort of reinventing the wheel. Because obviously, I mean, engagement's important, but it's something that each local authority has been doing for a long while. You know, to greater or lesser extent and success. But because we know from experience, it's never easy to consult with the public and to engage the public and to have those roots in there. But it's something that's has been built up. I mean, I suppose my question is, in terms of the intent here, what's the given that Simca doesn't have that history because it's very much a second-tier authority, so it simply doesn't have those roots into the community. How does this fit with the whole trend towards what some people call devolution and some people call the opposite? How does it fit with the history of them, and what's Simca really trying to do here in terms of, in comparison to what local authorities do and have been doing some time? What's the approach there?
So just to answer the previous question, I think I found them on this. Yeah, 9 and 10. Yeah, what we're trying to do differently, I suppose, is we have an opportunity to convene regionally. So how can we add value to existing engagement activities happening across the region that local authorities are leading on and the voluntary sector is leading on? So rather than operating in isolation and doing our own engagement activities in our own way, how can we work more collectively with local authorities and with the voluntary sector, for instance, to supplement existing engagement activities? And for instance, where we need to engage with people, for instance, on transport or skills, the skills programs that we operate, how can we bring on board existing knowledge and expertise and contacts from our local authority partners and from the voluntary sector as well? So it's basically trying to work more collaboratively with partners to try and reach a wider audience and more in more depth as well. So for instance, young people who we don't hear enough from.
Okay, I mean, here you say that, but I don't think it says anything about that in the paper here. I mean, it's a pretty fundamental thing, isn't it? So, I mean, if you were talking about supplementing what the local authority is already doing, you probably wouldn't have a strategy like this, which appears to be written from the basis that we're starting from scratch and that there's currently no real engagement, or it's been fairly limited. How do you square off those two things?
Well, I'd say it's not really a strategy. So it's a statement of intent. So it's more of a kind of setting our ambition to try and do engagement differently and better. And I'd say I can't reel off this kind of the page numbers that this is on, but I would say I think that operating more collaboratively and working with partners is expressed within the report, and I'm happy to come back to you afterwards once I've had a review on that basis.
Take the point about it not being a strategy, but it is a statement. But I mean, just going back to that point, I mean, seriously, if we were talking about actually supporting local authorities, it would probably defer to the work that's already being done and where there's a long legacy of it being done, and just the fact that you've got you've got a couple of hundred councillors across the region to draw on, so us sitting around the table, I mean, we all have stuff fed in all the time, and of course Simca simply doesn't have that reach. It's a bit like the health service. The health service has a completely different attitude towards local democracy. Like, it largely doesn't exist because they just don't deal with it, and so we have a very different feel in our. So you've got all those nuances there, but I just don't seem reflected here. This statement of intent doesn't recognise, it doesn't seem to spell out any recognition of what local authorities already do. I mean, should it? Could it be amended to include that? Could it do some work? Well, I'll let the answer first.
Yeah. So I think, as I said last time, I'll review it and get in touch with you. But yeah, absolutely. If we find upon review that it doesn't accurately sort of reflect that ambition, and the emphasis to work, closely and sort of utilise the expertise and experience of local authorities, then it certainly should, because it was my intention to make that clear when I drafted the statement of intent for engagement. It's one of the reasons why we work quite closely with all local authority partners, with some of the policy and engagement leads across all local authority partners when I drafted the statement of intent. And we'll be working with the local authorities when we develop the engagement strategy as well, in hopefully a series of workshops. And when I say local authorities, I mean, not just officers, but councillors as well. And hopefully, some of you will remember me from the workshop that we ran a few weeks ago as well with Scrutiny members around sort of looking at a bit of a case study around what engagement could look like, trying to sort of understand some principles that committee members saw as being important. I'm happy to cover some of those as well, if that would be useful.
Well, just finally, so I don't take up all the meeting. I mean, you possibly know that in Sheffield there's just been a huge piece of work done under the umbrella of the community strategy, which has had cross-party, cross-council support. It's quite an impressive piece of work, which I'm now surprised that the council as a whole managed to pull it off. But if I was wanting Simca to write a statement of intent on engagement, I'd be looking to say Simca should first look to what's being done in local authorities and see about supporting them in what they're already doing, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel and effectively replace local authorities. So I suppose if it's being rewritten, I mean, I'd like to see a completely different starting point. A lot of the content might be good, but a completely different starting point and aim, and perhaps a bit of deference to the fact of what people have been doing across authorities for a long time. Maybe something to take away.
I suppose the next step, anyway, which was quite useful for me to sort of broadcast to you all, is that this statement of intent will be developed into a comprehensive engagement strategy. So there certainly is an opportunity to make sure that that's emphasised in that engagement strategy. We've just recently appointed an organisation called Involve, who are a UK leader in sort of public participation. They've worked with the Scottish Government. They've also worked with Sheffield City Council recently on a climate engagement toolkit. So they'll be working with us on sort of co-creating what the engagement strategy looks like. So yeah, definitely working with local authority partners and then other partners as well.
Carl.
It does follow on from what Douglas just said. Only last week, I hope you don't mind me using the practical example of Doncaster. It's the only place I work from. But we held the OSMC meeting reviewing the borough strategy, and public engagement was a bone of contention there, because with Doncaster having a population of 315,000 people, a lot of money, and I'm talking value for money now, a lot of money was spent on public engagement through a number of ways. And what that resulted in was, from the online access, which is expensive and was done by another company, there was about 6,500 respondents. Now, that's out of 315,000 people. But apparently that's the second highest in South Yorkshire for returns. So you can see that number's lower. When we looked at it at ward level, there are 21 wards in Doncaster. We found that 2 or 3 wards with the best response level were about 1.5% of the people. There were several wards right at the far end who had less than 1% respondents to the public survey. That's concerning, isn't it? But I think I know why. I think it's probably because we're swamping the market, to be honest. That's what I truly believe. In my past, I was a neighbourhood police officer, and I know the best way to find out what people feel like is going out and talking to them, as opposed to trying to email them or get them to go to a link on a website. Doncaster did that, but they only managed to speak to 1,500 people out of 315,000. Now, once again, you've got to ask yourself, how much of a return is that when you're talking value for money, and how much information do you glean from such a small number of people out of 315,000? And I know that a big proportion of the people who engage with it engage with everything. They engage with every single thing we do. What I'm worried about is the other 310,000 people who are not engaging. You can read it several ways, I'm sure you will. It might be that they're all satisfied with what's happening in their borough. I don't think so. But we're not getting to them because they're sick and tired of having really glossy leaflets drop on them, which they've got to fill out, and they haven't got time to do it because they've all got working lives and things like that. What we've decided in Doncaster is to practically involve all the councillors more, because you are in the heart of. We've got 55 councillors, 2 or 3 in each ward. During our councillor sessions we have in the wards, that's when we're going to carry out these surveys. We're not going to wait to try and deliver. We're going to encourage people to come, and we'll survey them. We'll ask them the right questions. And I think what my big bugbear, having only come here since May, and I don't, and I've only got from May till now, is for value for money. I've always found market surveys and this type of public engagement to be really a poor value for money effort. I'm not poo-pooing it, but I'm saying I don't think it returns value for money. And you've already mentioned a company who are going to bring in to do this, which won't be cheap. But if it's returning 1 point, and that's probably, our figures are 2nd out of 4 boroughs. If that's the return, I don't think it is value for money. We need to do it on the ground, not by expecting people to interrupt their day, their busy day, and trying to make ends meet to answer surveys. I think it's the wrong way around.
There's a lot to unpack there. So I think Doncaster has a decent model. I think it's called the Thrive model of engagement, which is really interesting, and that's sort of everybody having a basically specific role to play in engagement. I found that quite interesting. You mentioned sort of 6,500 responses. I don't think that's necessarily that bad. I think it's the spread that's really important. If that's 6,500 people mainly coming from one part of Doncaster, mainly being, sort of one gender or one community or one age group or something like that, then it's quite skewed, and that's not great. But if it's a good spread, then I don't think 6,500 responses is that bad. That's a decent sample size that you can use from a kind of insight perspective. I think one of the things that we can do working better collaboratively with one another is by trying to sort of reach out to the silent majority. I think quite often, one of the groups you were talking about was the vocal minority, who you hear from time and time again. So it's using different tools and different ways of targeting people to make sure you're hearing the voices that you don't hear enough of, especially when you're making decisions that affect certain people. So how can you talk to the people who are going to be most affected by that decision, whether it's a certain bus route, whether it's a certain skills program, whether it's a certain police and crime kind of approach. yeah, in terms of the number of responses, I don't think that's necessarily that bad. It's just about reaching the right people. And then I think you talked about, I think you were sort of getting a sort of fatigue, consultation fatigue. That's sort of something that came up from the workshop as well that we talked about. And I'm looking at a sort of number of ways to target that. One of them is place-based consultation. So it's a bit like a one dig approach. You know, when people are getting into laying fibre optic broadband or sort of water pipes or something like that, how can you invite everybody else in to save time and money? So that's the same with engagement. So that's something that we're looking at with some partners at the minute, in how we can have a sort of a week of engagement activity around a particular theme with different partners. And then related to that is sharing insight. So there's something called the South Yorkshire Insights Hub or Bank currently that's run by the Integrated Care Partnership, where they have different consultations that all share their insights. So how can we do that across South Yorkshire? How can local authorities and Simca kind of share feedback and share insights? Because that may, in terms of a value for money point of view, that may mean you don't have to run a consultation. Because, for instance, if you found that you've already got the insight that you need from running a consultation sort of 2 months ago, then you don't need to run another one, so it avoids duplication. Do you want me to stop there? Yep.
And then we'll move.
Yeah, it's fine. Thank you for pointing me to where that was. That was really helpful. It is really comprehensive and it is quite long. It is quite long. And I don't know if the plan for the strategy is to kind of distill things down. Yeah, it is, right, that's great. And I think, given that your opening gambit is the Mayor's intent to do politics differently, I can very much see why there has not been a focus on looking at the way that authorities have been doing things for the last 100 years. In terms of, to some extent you've answered this, because you've got some really good sort of novel stuff that you were just talking about. So then, are you finding, how engaged are people at the moment? So some of the roles that I do, sort of internal party stuff, we're finding we're getting really poor, like open responses to emails, like really poor engagement, and it's very tedious, like internal elections and stuff like that. And I think that it feels to me like people in general are getting not necessarily consultation fatigue, but kind of like email fatigue, like bombardment of information fatigue, which is making it perhaps harder to get engagement and to get meaningful consultation. And I was just wondering if that was something that you were sort of, coming up against. I think you've laid out in what you just said some of your strategies for overcoming that. But I was wondering if that was something that you were sort of finding more generally.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the, I think trust is a key issue, and people not knowing what happens to the feedback when they give it. That's just across everyone, not just here at Simca. So how can we sort of build trust by responding to people once they've given their feedback, to explain how their feedback's been used or what we've decided to do. Just, a simple kind of polite follow-up will do in the first instance. And then usually people see that once something's happened to the feedback they've given them, they're more likely to give feedback again. And then also using sort of multi-channel engagement, so not just leaflets or just email or just surveys. And then you can get a good. Another interesting point here is around, which I think I've included in the statement of intent, is around remuneration. I can never say this properly, remuneration, and making and valuing people's time. So if we're asking people to come along and have their say at a workshop, especially if they're from a voluntary organisation, a member of the public, valuing their time. What that looks like, don't know for now, but definitely need to explore how we can value people's time and not just take from people.
That's how the big market research companies have done it for a long time, haven't they? They remunerate. That makes sense.
Yeah, through experience, I used to be a community planning officer in South Rotherham, and we used to work with parish councils, and we set up action plans following consultation. Some parish councils were better than others. Wales Parish, for example, we got 34% population participated. Artill, they continue for years after. Wait. Torwick Parish Council brought in a consultant and nobody knows where that one went. So we've got a position where it's about ownership and who can deliver. And if parish councils are at that level, take control of their own action plan, we worked in school with young people as well, that's when there's some positivity. It's about getting ownership of that consultation.
Thank you very much, Rick. I think we're going to have to wrap up now. Thank you very much, Liam. The committee has asked to note the statement of intent for engagement. And with any notes, I know you've been lots of feedback. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 11. I'll talk while there's a handover. It's Brownfield Housing Fund update. The report provides an update on Simca's Brownfield Housing Fund programme, highlighting progress, key risks and projected outcomes. The Brownfield Housing Fund provides funding to remove the barriers to bringing forward new housing development on brownfield land. The programme has run from 2020 to 2026, and all remaining funding needs to be committed by the 31st of March 2026. I hand over to Colin Blackburn.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would say I won't repeat necessarily what's in the report or the presentation, which had some examples of some of the schemes that we are investing in and supporting. Just to give you the board a little bit more background, I say the purpose of the programme is to fill that viability gap, essentially, where there's market failure, particularly on brownfield sites, and it's been an enabling fund. So it's that kind of upfront investment that's required to bring sites forward. So site decontamination, site clearance, purchasing sites, put in road infrastructure, utilities, and other infrastructure as well, such as one site, a bridge, for example, which enabled the site to come forward. But also, it's been, obviously, over the last 6 years, it's been through obviously quite a difficult time for the construction sector, particularly following the COVID years. So we're flexible in terms of enabling, supporting kind of cash flow for developers to keep developers on site, so that schemes could continue where sites have stalled. So we've been very flexible in terms of how we've approached that. Essentially, whatever's needed to make schemes come forward. As set out in the report, we've got a programme which is coming into its last stages by end of March next year. We've got 49 schemes in that programme, which will, if followed, will deliver 3,900 homes, which is over the target that was given to us by CLG, by government, for that. The majority of the schemes are in Sheffield, and others in Rotherham and the other 3 areas. Some of that is a reflection, really. That's where the majority of the brownfield sites are, and in many of some of the other districts, say particularly in Barnsley, a lot of the housing sites and housing allocations are on greenfield sites coming forward, and that's something that we haven't been able to support because they've not been eligible for that. Certainly going forward into the future, and we're just waiting our housing allocation, hopefully within the integrated settlement. I know you mentioned talking about that earlier. We're hoping that we've got more flexibility so that we can help more of the region going forward, because there are still viability gaps and greenfield sites across the region as well. It's not just brownfield. So as set out, there's about 60% of schemes are now in contract or in delivery or have been completed, and there's about 80% of the funding of the scheme that are still, we're developing business cases for them and accelerating. We have to get into contract as part of the requirements by the end of March. So what we are asking for is the business cases to be submitted to us by Christmas, and that's what we're working. That's what the Programme Management Office team are working with the scheme sponsors to bring them forward. So we're in a good position. I think it's quite a substantial programme that we delivered, and hopefully we'll be successful in getting another housing funding programme as part of the integrated settlement, so we can continue on the pipeline with schemes going forward.
Thank you for that, because I was going to ask you about the single assessment, because you've talked about it, because how seamless is it going to be, the transition from the very specific way you're allowed to spend your money into the single assessment? And are you looking at ways where you can expand looking at how you deal with brownfield sites, because obviously there's, looking at, the diversity net gain and all the other things where, you talk about in the report, and ways of solutions of bringing those forward that may not have fallen within the scheme into the single assessment going forward.
Yes, Chair. We've worked with the local authorities in Homes England over the last 12 months to develop a housing pipeline for this very reason. So we don't, like in 2020, where we allocated some money and it was like, right, how are we going to spend this? And we had to start from scratch, really building up a pipeline. We've built up a pipeline now, which is shared by the local authorities and ourselves. And where that value is there is that we've got schemes now where we're saying, right, these are the next schemes that could come forward in the next 3 years, and we're going to prioritise them in terms of supporting their business case development, subject to us getting obviously a funding settlement, which through the integrated settlement. So we're in a really good position, and an example is earlier this year, obviously when we got allocated an extra £12.3 million. We had schemes already to go, right, let's put these forward. So we were able to really react really quickly, bring schemes into that pipeline, and that's gone forward for the.
So you've got a real pipeline after this, if funding, within the single assessment that potentially could go forward. So it's not just going to be this is it and the draw comes down. You're going to be able to whatever money that are allocated from within the single assessment, you have got sites that you have identified and could go forward quite quickly.
Yes, Chair.
Carl?
It mentions that a small number of projects have either been dropped or delayed. Is that insignificant, because you say a small number, and what are the reasons for that, please?
I would say it's probably over the 5 years. I couldn't put a figure on that, but it's probably less than a dozen, let's say, with there. As you can imagine, some schemes 5 years ago, these are going to go forwards, and actually they've either been deprioritised or there's other issues that have come to light. Some of the problems are maybe the viability has just been too significant. So say a site that's on a sloping area, a sloping hillside, let's say, if there's a viability gap already, the kind of cut and fill, getting infrastructure there, putting in roads and other connections, it may just become too much of a viability gap that it doesn't go forward. So the scheme sponsor doesn't work to go forward. We obviously have an assurance process. We can't just fund unlimited. There's a criteria through the 5 cases business case, which Treasury Green Book, so we have to follow that. So there's only a certain amount that we can provide. We do try and push as far as we can to, as I say, to try and bring forward sites as we can. But sometimes the viability is just too significant. Or there's been situations, some of which we've responded to, but things like certainly in South Yorkshire, there's been sites where they've gone on site and found a mine shaft, for example, which was unexpected. That's an additional cost. I know that there's at least one site where we've been able to support that scheme to, I think essentially it's putting concrete in really to make a foundation to enable that site to go forward. But there's others kind of, sometimes contamination can be assumed, but when they actually go on site, it becomes too great, and therefore other sites maybe come forward. What we've tried to do in that situation, as said there, is try to find other sites with there, and that's the importance, I say, as we mentioned, the pipeline really, to have a really readable pipeline that we can bring forward sites where opportunities arise.
Hannah?
Thank you. Yeah, so I have a number of questions about Barnsley, because I've totted this up, and Barnsley has had 3 projects which have benefited from this out of 49, which adds up to 57 out of 3,923 homes, and just short of 1.3 million out of that 68 million pot. Local degree is poor. So I know that Barnsley adopted its local plan in 2019, which is presumably what put a lot of the constraints on this, because it was primarily, as you've said yourself, greenfield sites, not brownfield sites. I know that Sheffield is still at low-level war over its local plan. Excuse my ignorance, where are Rotherham and Doncaster with their local plans?
Rotherham at the moment are starting their review of their local plan. Doncaster, it may be subject to Doncaster Council, but they'll be coming up to review maybe in the next couple of years.
So sorry, so review as in it was adopted?
They've been adopted previously,
yeah,
and you have to review every kind of 5 years. So Rotherham's has come up now this year. I think they've started that kind of preliminary work, and Doncaster I think is next in line to start to work on that. But the timing will be subject to Doncaster Council.
Right. Okay. So, am I right in saying that? Because obviously Barnsley approved its local plan in early 2019, so before this fund became available. And is it fair to say that the lack of brownfield sites within that local plan has hindered Barnsley's access to this fund, meaning that it's had such a small share of it?
I wouldn't necessarily relate it directly to the local plan, but obviously that is a consideration, because one of the criteria that we have is that sites that come forward for us to invest in have to be in alignment with local policy. With that, so it is a relevant. I think generally in I think you mentioned earlier, I think the bigger issue I think in Barnsley is that there's just not the amount of brownfield opportunities there with schemes that are coming forward either from the local authority, housing associations, or the private sector developer. There may have been other schemes that we've spoken to and had initial conversations with, but then haven't proceeded for various reasons, let's say, for that. I say it's been one of the issues that we've been talking to government in terms of our next settlement, because as you can see, there's only 3 schemes that have come forward in Barnsley for there, but there are a lot of greenfield sites that are in housing greenfield sites that are in the local plan, and some of those I am assured that will have a funding gap, a viability gap, which will require that. Our hands have been tied over the last 6 years on this programme. Hopefully those shackles will be off and we'll be able to support those schemes, because even providing, even though it's a greenfield site, the infrastructure required, the road infrastructure required, the utilities, all of those, even site enabling, may still result in those schemes being unviable.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that your hands have been tied. There's not a lack of brownfield in Barnsley, but those sites were not put into the local plan. I mean, there's not a lack of brownfield, is there? There's plenty of brownfield in Barnsley.
So what was that brownfield there?
But those sites are not in the local plan, and so therefore, the whole point of the local plan is that you develop where you develop in the local plan, and you don't develop on other places. So it sounds like you've been shackled, but it also sounds like Barnsley shackled themselves as well.
Douglas?
Yeah, thanks, yeah. I mean, as you said, Colin, Sheffield's doing a lot of brownfield site just because there's a real focus on redeveloping brownfield sites and not building on the green belt. Mixed success. What I was going to say, I was just thinking about, it's one of the areas, well, it's one of the few areas where there's quite a significant amount of state funding going into quite a lot of private sector profit-making companies. We'll talk about the need to build council housing, and we know about the challenges around that. But I was just wondering, what return do we get from private developers? I know there's the issue about viability for persuading them to make sure these schemes happen in the first place. They will happen. The developers will make money out of them because they're profit-making organisations. In the long run, what do we get back in that sense, would you say?
I think to be very simple, the answer is I think we get the homes that we need in this region, and obviously as in Sheffield, I can see I think there's about 2,900 homes that have come forward, some of which are in very large, like Cannon Cannon Brewery, 550 homes. That's got a funding gap, partly because of the brownfield, the contamination in the site, the clearance, etc. Without the kind of viability gap being filled in there, that site probably wouldn't have come forward. And therefore that's 550 homes which we dearly need in this area as well. So I'd say that's the benefit of there. And also I think it's that wider regeneration. Cannon Brew is a good example. It's going to be a kind of a bit of a catalyst to regenerating the area as well, a key gateway into the city centre as well. So I think those are kind of the benefits, the wider benefits to get in terms of those bigger schemes from private sector developers.
Right, we're running out of time. Mick, and then I've got a question from Carl.
All right, well, mine's a statement, really. You did say in your presentation that you're moving on, the next tranche will be non-brownfield sites. And that goes me back to the statement I made when Anna made a comment before. A lot of brownfield sites in our area aren't owned by local authority or any control over. We've got Fitzwilliam and others who own tracts of land which they want to develop. But unfortunately, we've also got landowners who own protected land, which take authority to court to release the land so that they can build on those protected plots. And unfortunately, we've just had a case in my ward, actually, where the landowner challenged our planning decisions and took it to the highest level and won. And now we've got developers coming to other protected land and wanted to start development. So I'm looking at the connection. I didn't hear.
Because we've not built enough houses.
Hold on, Anna. I didn't interrupt you, my friend.
Hurry up.
You were making a political point. Can we just chair it, please? So we're in a position, an invidious position, whereas if we ain't got the access to brownfield land because they don't want to build on it and they want to sit on it, and then we're trying to protect greenfield land, we will the next tranche support Barnsley Council in terms of being able to access funding so that we, as an authority, can build and develop and not be at the ransom of the developers.
As you say in a statement, I was going to say we'll move on to Carl.
Yeah. Just to go, I would say it's not definite yet that our next housing fund will be give us the flexibility for greenfield, but that's what we've requested. So that's hopefully for that. And yes, I can understand the issues you mentioned there. Certainly, we deal with housing. So whether that's, as I said, from local authority developing housing, housing association developing housing, or private sector developers as well. So we work with the local authority in particular to bring forward those sites, but also for them to broker discussions with private sector where potentially they want to bring, maybe for regeneration purposes, bring sites forward as well. So it's an iterative and engaging process and collaborative process that we try to take forward. But we are open to considering all types of sites within eligibility criteria.
Very quick answer as well, please.
Just in terms of the local plan then, are you strictly working within the parameters of the local plan, just for clarification? And how did the government's change in definition of brownfield sites affect your work?
We ask in terms of, I said, one of our requirements is that the schemes are supported by local policy. That might be local plan policy, but also might be housing policy as well. So we take into account of those. In terms of changing government policy in there, it's coming obviously towards the end of our programme. That's something obviously we're going to have to consider as part of the next programme going forward, because obviously some of those policies are not enshrined in the planning infrastructure bill yet, or etc., and they'll come forward. So we will take it. We'll need to take them into account.
We've run out of time for this item. Thank you very much, Colin, for that. And the committee is asked to note the Brownfield Housing Fund update. Thank you very much. We'll be moving on to item 12. Let a little bit of a changeover. I know, that's why I was trying to move on. Welcome, Mayor Oliver Coppard. Thank you for being here, and I'll ask for questions. First question from Brian.
With the government's announcements on devolution and possible the fire authority coming under some kind of your control, what plans have you got in place to actually look at that, and how will that work with scrutiny?
Thank you. So unlike a load of other places, I think we're actually quite well advanced in that space. So I think the government's intention is for that transfer to happen in 2027, largely out of our hands in terms of the timetable. But what we've done is we've brought on David Peat, who I think might have presented to this committee before. David was previously working in the PCC space. He's actually done this work already, this type of work already, in other parts of the country, and he's now leading on that work. He's a dedicated officer, helping us to kind of navigate that transfer. The transfer of the fire service, as opposed to the police service, the Police and Crime Commissioner's office, is a slightly different beast. It's a slightly different thing for all sorts of different reasons that you will understand around the way that firefighters are employed, the different challenges that they face, and so we're having to take a different approach. It's not just a sort of carbon copy template of how we, for instance, brought in the PCC team. So David is currently working through all those different permutations of what that might look like. I can't tell you exactly what that'll look like myself yet, because we don't know, because we're still working through that with colleagues. Clearly the FBU have a say in all of that, the government have a say in all of that, so we're working through those problems. There is still a fair amount of time, is the good news, and that's because we've been really proactive in bringing on David and making sure that we are taking that approach. So I'm happy to come back and talk about that in more length as that develops, but that's where we are right now.
Josh.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, Oliver. I think I'll move the conversation on to buses. And of course, everyone was very excited when the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority contributed £1.6 million towards electric buses. The problem we've since seen with these electric buses is that the same manufacturer in Norway and Denmark, they found in those two countries that they could be potentially remotely accessed, and that the CCP in China could perhaps do something there. So there is potentially a security threat there. So I suppose, given the context of China, we've seen it with the 5G network, why did the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority contribute that amount of money to Chinese buses?
So I'm not aware of any conversations about kill switches happening on our buses. The way the bus procurement system works is clearly we want value for money for the British taxpayer, as I think you would agree. And right now, because of the position of the UK bus manufacturing market, the best deals to this point have been available from Chinese manufacturers. Now, to a certain extent, I've been working actually behind the scenes to try and make sure that there is a procurement process in place for combined authorities to work collectively to get a better deal from British manufacturers. And I've been pleased to see Simon Lightwood, the bus minister, lean into that piece of work in a way that the previous government quite honestly didn't. So we've been able now to have conversations with bus manufacturers in this country and the other combined authorities, because collectively we're going to buy thousands of buses. So London alone is going to buy, for instance, 9,000 buses, electric buses over the next, I think it's decade alone. So we've been working together to see if we can buy buses together from British manufacturers, and in that way develop, frankly, a sort of renaissance of the British bus manufacturing market, using franchising and public control as the mechanism to deliver cheaper prices, because if we buy en masse, then we will be able to get a better deal from the manufacturers, support UK growth because we'll be buying from British manufacturers, but also deliver the types of buses that at the moment aren't on offer from British manufacturers, because the design standards elsewhere in the country, by common consent amongst the bus operators, do seem to be better. So I think that's the kind of sweep of things that we're trying to achieve through working together up until this point. Quite honestly, just because of the procurement process and because of wanting to protect taxpayers' money, we have gone down a different road.
Hannah? No, we're gonna come back because we're short of time. Hannah?
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Oliver. So Barnsley train station has over 2 million passengers a year. which is more than the combined numbers that go through Dewsbury and Huddersfield and Batley. They're getting electrification. At the risk of mentioning the Woodhead line, which was electrified back in the 50s. What have you got any plans for electrifying, for example, the Sheffield to Wakefield line to stop us from falling behind again?
Well, so I wouldn't have any plans because, as you know, the system is run by, well, it will be run by GBR. So if you're asking if the government have got any plans that I'm aware of, no. I think Heidi has been quite clear, the Transport Secretary has been quite clear, to my chagrin. She has been quite clear about the Midland Main Line in particular, but then other rail electrification schemes besides. Now, look, I want to see that position change, and I'm lobbying the government on that issue. You'll know that we are kind of heavily invested in the conversation around Northern Powerhouse Rail, which has an implication for the conversation that you're talking about, but more broadly as well. So, look, I will, for what it's worth, I think the thrust of your question I agree with, in the sense that I think we need electrification of the different lines in South Yorkshire. We need the electrification of the line between Sheffield and London. My position has always been we should have started those schemes up north and then worked down. I think we could all collectively, cross-party, agree that that would have been a smarter move. And so, look, I will keep on lobbying the government for electrification of our schemes because I think they're a really good way to decarbonise and to make trains nicer and quicker. Right now, the government don't agree with me, but I'll keep on asking them those questions.
Right, I've got a question. It's about bus stops, about buses, because obviously South Yorkshire don't appear to reply to many of my colleagues, and they're asked, at the moment, many bus stops are placed at the behest of different bus companies. Is there a developing action plan under franchising for ensuring that bus stops are placed where local people need them to be? Will there be a process for local people to call for new or better placed stops under the franchise arrangements?
Before I answer the substantive question, can I just say, if people aren't getting responses from our team, can you please let me know that that's the case, and happy to do it in this open forum if you want to, but equally just tell me privately, because that isn't good enough if you're not getting replies, and I need to be able to tell my team that they've got to pull their finger out if they're not replying in that way. So can you please let me know if you're not getting responses out? Because the only way I know is if you tell me, so please do, and that goes for anyone. This might be wishful thinking, but the hordes of the public that are watching this, if you could please also do the same. Let me know if through social media or otherwise if you're not getting responses, and I'll happily get involved, because that's just not okay. Even if we're telling you news you don't want to hear, we should still be replying. On the issue itself of bus stops, at the moment there are rules around where bus stops can and can't go, as you'd understand, and also how frequently bus stops are supposed to be in place. So I think it's 400 metres or yards, off the top of my head, I can't remember which one, but essentially 400 yards. Every 400 yards on a route there should be a bus stop. Now there's an argument to say that that's too many bus stops on a route. Certainly in some places that's too many bus stops on a route, because what that does is slow down the bus, because it's got to stop every 400 yards. And bus companies will tell you that's one of the main reasons why buses are sometimes delayed. Now I would argue what we need is a wholesale look again at the network more broadly, because the network as we understand it is actually just forgive my French, a sort of bastardised version of what we have previously had. So the sort of, I don't know, the 50 bus that I grew up with from Worlow into Sheffield is now the 30, and it's just a similar route but slightly different. And what we've done constantly over time is just change bits of those routes as the bus companies have essentially decided that it was profitable or not profitable to deliver different bits of that service. So I think we need a wholesale look again at where are people travelling to and from using the best data sources available to us, and I'm talking big data sources of anonymised phone data, for instance, but other things beside travel patterns, new housing developments, workplaces that have come on stream, etc., etc., etc. That seems to be a big piece of work. Now, it's not going to be done in time for franchising, partly because on day one of franchising, the worst thing we could do would be to change all of the different things at once. So we don't want to change the routes and networks as well as at the same time as changing the model and the ownership, all that. So it will change over time when we have franchising, because I've asked already for that network redesign to be something that we do in the not too distant future, and that will then feed into where the bus stops sit and go. But I also want the standard of bus stops to improve. So I've asked the team increasingly, when we've got capital monies available to us in the MCA, one of the things I'm doing over time is building up a bit of a fighting fund for bus stops, because bus stops for me are a really tangible example of where the public realm has just failed. So bus stops have been bought off one company largely in this region, and that one company, a perfectly good company, but don't necessarily design or deliver those in the way that we might want. So I want a bit more flexibility in that system. I want a better standard of design. I want better services for people at those bus stops. You know, we've all been at a bus stop when it's been tipping it down with rain, really, really windy. You don't know when the bus is turning up, and it's freezing cold, and it's an unpleasant experience. Actually, there's no reason why bus stops can't be better at kind of cocooning you, protecting you from the weather, helping you to understand where you're going to and from, and all sorts of other things besides, green roofs, you name it. So we're looking again at what that design standard might look like. Now again, not a quick fix, I admit, you know, really isn't going to be a quick thing that we're going to be able to replace all 3,000 bus stops in South Yorkshire, but it's something that I'm really invested in, and I don't often talk about it at parties, but bus stops are my particular kind of focus in lots of these meetings, because bus stops really feel quite tangible to a lot of people, especially when you're stuck late at night at a bus pole, rather than actually having a better service available to you.
Thank you for that. Back to Josh.
Chinese bus stops.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. I hope not. I mean, you mentioned earlier in your response about value for money. Now, what we're seeing is in both Norway and Denmark is they've had to make a choice whether or not to take the SIM cards out. Okay, so I believe it was Denmark who decided that they won't take the SIM cards out because that would then lose other features of the bus. Right, so I think you're following me here in terms of value for money. So the likelihood is that you're going to have to make a choice as to whether or not to take these SIM cards out. If you take these SIM cards out, you're not going to have the features that you want. So in terms of value for money, I'm not sure how you square that circle. And then the other part that I wanted to touch on was you mentioned the UK market, but of course the UK market isn't the only market. So if you weren't satisfied with the UK market, what's wrong with the European market? Why did you have to go to China? Why did nobody think about the security of our region in making this decision?
Pleased to see you outing yourself as a pro-European. That is nice to hear. And a single market that would allow us to buy buses. I mean, look, I want to support a British market, and that's been my focus, is trying to get the government to help us, to work with us, to be able to support British designers and builders. You know, Alexander Dennis, for instance, who have a plant here in South Yorkshire, I believe in Rotherham. So look, like, very keen to continue to try and do that work. You'll forgive me, I don't know in the detail you seemingly do the information about the SIM cards and the Norwegian buses, but look, I will take your word for it, and I will ask my team questions about exactly what is going on with our SIM cards when we get them. I want our buses to work just like you do, and we'll buy the best buses we possibly can, hopefully from British suppliers.
Yeah, I've got Hannah.
I'm not going to ask what you talk about at parties, Oliver, if not bus stops. So considerable sales made by Speciality Steel UK, which was formerly Liberty Steel in South Yorkshire, to businesses in Europe prior to that business going into liquidation. With the imposition of new steel tariffs by the EU that will harm their recovery and growth, will you lobby and advocate to every Labour MP in South Yorkshire, and indeed the government, that they support the Liberal Democrats' bill to create a new customs union to remove barriers to trade? I think you sort of answered that actually in your previous comment, Oliver, so I hope you double down.
I was personally pleased to not only be part of, but lead the campaign to keep us in the European Union on a cross-party basis, working with all different friends from across political parties to keep us in the EU, and I remain a passionate pro-European, and I will have that conversation with the government at every opportunity that I get, supporting a sensible and pragmatic approach to our European allies and friends across the water.
Thank you, Oliver.
I've no doubt the leaflet will say that.
That's quite what the transcript will say. Douglas.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to ask, what do you think are the big worries facing the combined authority right now? What's worrying you? That question.
Can I say Chinese SIM cards, or am I not allowed to say? Okay, no, it wasn't. You're right. It was number of issues that I'm concerned about right now, and in all seriousness, you know, there's been some really horrible news over the last 24 hours. You'll have seen what's happened on London Road with that young man who was shot. And I believe there's a press conference going on as we speak, where the police are releasing more information, and it's awful, really. So big concern there for me around gun violence, but that remains. It's been a long time issue, as you'll understand, in South Yorkshire, as has knife crime and other types of extreme violence. But certainly want to make sure that we are absolutely doing everything we can to clamp down and crack down there. And I think we are having some success. Knife crime and violent crime seem to be coming down But no complacency clearly, because issues like yesterday will keep on coming back. So that is a concern for me, and my heart goes out to the family of the young lad. Transport is always a worry for me. I always am concerned about public transport and how it is operating in South Yorkshire. The tram network is having some problems at the moment, as I'm sure people know, and that for me is of concern. People not being able to get to work, to see friends and family, to get hospital appointments is never going to be good enough. We're down at, I think, about 90% on a bad day of trams on certain routes, which isn't good enough. It's a fairly high standard that we have for the tram network. 99.1% punctuality is the sort of standard that we achieve most of the time. And so when it drops to, for instance, 90%, as it has done, and some instances, it's on average about 95 on a bad day, but sometimes drops to 90, that isn't good enough, and we have to fix that. I can explain the reasons if you're interested. I'm just conscious of time. So transport always clearly a big issue. And then there are other sort of big systemic issues that we're also trying to fix clearly, like essentially the size and type of economy that we have in the region. And I've said for a long time now, we need a bigger, better economy. That clearly links into things like health, which also concern me, because every single day we have people living in poor housing, in communities where they can't get access to a doctor, in places where they are not able to have a fit and healthy lifestyle like so many of us take for granted. And so those issues are always kind of clearly important to me, and we're trying to do a lot of work on all of those different issues at once, as well as a bunch of other things besides. And just on a very immediate basis, we've got the budget tomorrow, and I want to make sure South Yorkshire's getting every single thing we can from that budget possible. So, any number of worries. We've got sort of 8 minutes left. I could talk all afternoon about my worries, because I worry far too much, but very concerned about a number of things.
Okay, I'll take the next question, and it'll be Hannah. Have you asked the government to review the loss of funding for level 7 apprenticeships for older, for over the age? I'm trying to think what age it's been cut off at. Because they've got a great record in Sheffield, Hallam particularly, upgrading our workforce in South Yorkshire. And this loss of funding, I just see will adversely affect our economy here as against lots of the rest of the country. Have you asked for that to be reviewed?
So I've not met with the Skills Minister or Education Minister recently. Our teams meet all the time, as you would imagine, with civil servants. Can I come back to you on what exactly those conversations have focused on around level 7 apprenticeships, and where any of those conversations have got to? Because off the top of my head, I'm afraid I don't know exactly what has been done in that specific space. We've had you might know, we've had a change of team in that area, so I think there's just been a bit of a disjointed kind of moment in time. So let me just kind of come back to you and tell you exactly what's happened, if that's okay.
Hannah?
Yeah, last one from me. So with one of my other hats on, I chair our local early help delivery group, and we had some really good feedback over the Beds for Babies scheme. As you know, it was a little slow to roll out in Barnsley, but it is now rolling out, and yeah, really, really good feedback. One of the things that has been flagged by a number of people around that table is that when they are going to homes and finding babies with an unsuitable place to sleep, they're also finding older children, so children over the age of 5, with an unsuitable place to sleep. Some of that I think is housing linked, but some of it is also bed linked. So I just wondered if not to do down the scheme as it exists, which has been brilliant. Particularly with the integrated settlement coming in, are there any plans to expand that scheme at all? I promised them I'd ask you.
No, there are no plans, but if people tell me that there are specific issues and those issues are egregious and obvious and we should be able to try and help, then I'm happy to look at that. No one's raised that with me before and said it in that way. So if people do say to me that is a problem that we need to try and address, I think we know clearly there are housing issues right across South Yorkshire, all different age ranges, of course there are. And we would like to be able to try and address all of them. The truth is we just don't have the money to do a lot of that. If there is a way to kind of extend it to 6, 7, 8-year-olds, whatever that might be, and we can do that within an envelope that we can afford, of course, more than happy to look at that. I just don't know how we might do some of that, because it becomes a different type of programme, given the scale of, the size of a bed for an adult is different. The ones that you'll have seen, the ones that we give out for kids are essentially extendable beds. So they're beds that maybe are kind of like good for all sorts of different ages up to the age of 5. I think it's a different thing once you get into sort of more adult beds. But look, I'm not speaking from a position of expertise in terms of the types of beds available. So, yeah.
Would it be helpful if people record keep the sort of numbers and instance of that and feed it directly into your team?
I think feeding back through the programme management of that programme, Beds for Babies. So health visitors, you know, I used to work quite closely with health visitors in a former life when I was doing book trust. You know, I know health visitors are a brilliant way into, you know, trusted way into families. If health visitors and others who are delivering those schemes see specific problems that they think we should be looking to try and address, I'd really appreciate those people feeding back into the programme exactly what that looks like, so we can take a view over time about how we might be able to extend it if we can afford it. Thank you.
Douglas?
Good point. I knew it's there for a reason. Different tack, but talking about sort of economy and culture really, and museums. So I'm thinking of national museums that we got in Sheffield, in South Yorkshire. We've got, I'm thinking of the National Emergency Services Museum, and I was just thinking about the fact it's unique nationally. It builds on the city's heritage. It actually brings in a lot of people, and its barrier to growth now is about its size. It could bring in more people if it could physically get them in and out of the building and facilities there. And then the knock-on economic effect of that is supporting hotels, supporting restaurants, and all the business there around it. It's located right on the edge of where we have the major infrastructure scheme, which has caused some disruption to them, but they're really pleased about it, as everyone else is. It's a big improvement in that area of the city. Obviously a police commissioner as well, and I think they're coming up their centenary in a few years, and I was just wondering, if you're looking at them from the economic point of view, what sort of help could Simca offer to help them expand, develop business cases, obtain land, etc.?
And we've got and we're blessed with a number of good sort of museums and cultural heritage sites in South Yorkshire right across the whole of the region, and I think, you know, we should all be really proud of those. We've just, led by Tom Hunt, actually a brilliant piece of work. Tom's led on a cultural economy framework, essentially a piece of work allowing us to understand how we might better invest through the MCA in culture and creative industries, because up until this point those industries have largely had to go through the sort of mainstream MCA funding model, which obviously doesn't always work for a museum of that type, a creative business, a creative industry. So we've created a cultural economy framework now. It still has to be go through the MCA process to get signed off, and so to be in place for people to be able to access. But what that will then allow us to do is to be able to give businesses or charities the opportunity to then come to us and say, this is what we're doing. We'll work within that cultural economy framework to be able to say, this is how you could best support us. So without preempting that cultural economy framework or explaining it in detail, that's essentially how we will be able to hopefully help different businesses or different charities to be able to get funding from the MCA. Whether or not we will be able to support them, I don't know, but that's the process that we've put in place. Thank you.
Right, we're running out of time. What is one thing you'd want from the budget tomorrow for South Yorkshire?
I'm only allowed one. Look, this isn't just South Yorkshire specific. I do want to see an end to the 2-child cap. It's the best way to end child poverty, in terms of bringing the most number of kids out of poverty. And I realise for some people, that's about fairness. I know not everybody agrees with me on the 2-child cap. If you look at the polling, it seems that some people do want to keep the 2-child cap. I think some people think that families getting more money for having more children isn't fair. My view is it's not the kid's fault. You know, if a kid's grown up in poverty for the reasons that we've just talked about in terms of bed poverty or anything else, it's not their fault that they've got 2 younger siblings, and therefore it is, you know, up to us to try and support those kids, help those kids wherever we can, and therefore, you know, it's not South Yorkshire specific. There are kids obviously in South Yorkshire in that position who aren't being supported. It's a national challenge, but I think it was a pernicious thing that was done because it felt punitive to really target those kids, and I just don't think it was the right approach, and therefore I want to see the government at least bring an end to the 2-child cap. It's really expensive to end that, I know, but you know, I'd like to see those families receive more support.
It's a sentiment I wholeheartedly agree with, and thank you very much for your time. I think it's just bang on 4 o'clock.
Thank you.
You've got another meeting to go to. Thank you very much again.
Thanks everyone.
That concludes our meeting. We'll finish dead on 4 o'clock. Thank you very much, everybody.